Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome to reading Rousseau's Social Contract. Um, Today, I am going to be introducing the social contract, so it's not going to be a long video, but I want to get into it. Now, what is so important about social contract is I think it is in many ways one of Rousseau's and most accessible books, even though things like this second discourse on equality, it plays a very important role in shaping Rousseau's reputation, particularly his first discourse on about the arts, which made his reputation. Okay, so what's so interesting about Rousseau's social contract is that it was kind of done not at the height of the beginning of his reputation, but it's at basically at a point where he's established his reputation. He in 1755 his discourse on equality has already raised the issues, and many of the issues that he's done here is like this. He dedicated the discourse on equality, I think, to Geneva in a sense. He sees himself, even though he goes to the French court and hangs out the French circles. He is a child. He sees himself as a child. He is from Geneva. His family's from Geneva, which is a French-speaking part of Switzerland. One of the cantons of Switzerland. It is a republic in that sense, and it has the sense of this republican tradition. And Rousseau seems to want to emulate that tradition, and wishes to present it and defend it against, let's say, the more tradition of monarchy, right? So he is a defender of republics. He wants to see himself. The discourse of equality uh, well, it was shocking because it didn't win him the prize. The thing that won him his prize, his first discourse, won him the prize, reputation. The second discourse was a little less well received. Um, he was getting into trouble with the church at this time. With this, at the same time, he's writing his Emile. His Emile and his social contract will come about relatively about the same time. Uh, I don't want to get the dates wrong. Uh, the Emile 1763, social contract 1762. The reaction, the social contract or the du contract social, the principles Deutschrecht, political right. Now, this was part of the argument was that Rousseau was trying to write a bigger book on political right that he kind of never gets to, never completes. And if you ever study the the collected works of Rousseau, and that I have an edition from 2 volume set in Cambridge from the beginning of the 20th century, which had his discussions, chapters on war and things. You can see the background of it. Now, he was contracted to write an article on political economy for the encyclopedia, and he wrote it, and it was put out there. And he was thinking about writing a simple. Then he began a big project of studying political. He wanted, in many ways, it was supposed to be a kind of um, uh, how can I say this? A kind of challenge to Montesquieu. I think it is very much he's responding to Montesquieu. He wants to respond to Grotius and many of the students of Grotius who talked about divided sovereignty in that sense, and us who understood this in terms of this. He also wanted to kind of address Hobbes, but also but not less, but not overthrow Hobbes completely, but in many sense, correct Hobbes in this sense. As we know, Voltaire hated this, used his publications to mock and criticize Rousseau, right, in this sense because of this. But um, Kant will say, well, Rousseau was particularly the social contract, is perhaps the closest to a complete statement of that set of moral philosophy in that sense. Kant wrote that I am myself a researcher by inclination. I feel that the entire thirst for cognition and the eager restlessness to proceed further in it, as well as the satisfaction of every acquisition. There was a time when I believed this alone could constitute the honor of humankind. I was despised, and I despised the rabble who knows nothing. Rousseau set me right. This blinding prejudice vanishes. I learn to honor human beings, and I would feel far less useful than the common laborer if I did not believe that this consideration could impact value to all others. In other words, and in order to establish the rights of humanity. This is from Kant's Reflections. Um, Now, this is the point here that Rousseau, in many ways, is this great evangelical voice of republicanism. And also, the social contract is also kind of a view of democracy, small scale. Now, he wants to return to the defense of the republic, and this is he turns again like he did in his discourse on equality, which is the introduction. He talks about Geneva, but it's also a defense of Sparta in that sense, right? This is kind of he looks towards Sparta as a kind of but then I would say a Sparta that's kind of idealized in sense. In other words, he's going to be turning in this sense. And Carlyle gets it right. I think Carlyle. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Carlyle always. And he says, and now has not Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Jean-Jacques promulgated his new Evangel of the Social Contract, evangelical, explaining the whole mystery of government and how it is contracted and bargained for to universal satisfaction, theories of government slash right. Such have been and will be in the age of decadence, right? Acknowledge them to their degree by their nature, who knows nothing in vain, as step in her great process, right? This is this kind of this idea of, he continues and this says, he goes, that young generation has exchanged the skeptic's creed. What shall I believe? For passionate faith in this gospel, according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, is a further step in the business and betokens. In other words, he really Carlyle despised this, what he saw as Rousseau's role. You see the role of some Rousseau on the French Revolution that people argue, right? The influence of Maximin Robespierre during his diary on the Estates General 79 says, "Divine man, it was you who taught me to know myself. When I was young, you brought me to appreciate the true dignity of my nature and to reflect on the great principles which govern the social order. I saw you in your last days, and for me, the great recollection of that time will always be the source of proud joy. I contemplated your august letters, your features, and I saw there the imprint of those dark griefs which the injustices of man have inflicted on. Again, this is the two versions, right? There's this is Robespierre, the leader of the mob in that sense, this kind of revolutionary, radical dictatorship of the mob, who looks at. And I don't think you can look at this quote that he gives. It's not necessary to his work in that sense. It's maybe to the discourse of equality, and I don't, the argument that has he understood? Does he really understand Rousseau? And I think, and this is like Rousseau. Rousseau gets blamed. This is my teacher when the person I was influenced by, Kendall, argued. Rousseau gets blamed like for the French Revolution and all revolutionary zeal. In fact, the English political theorists tend to always say, Rousseau is always bad. Rousseau bad. And the thing is, Rousseau bad, Locke good. Rousseau bad, Locke good. But in many ways, Locke is as guilty of worse things than Rousseau, in the sense that he unleashes a great deal of problems, and that many of the things that Rousseau was responding to are problems or or implicit issues within both Hobbes and Locke. It's not a repudiation, or the traditional common understanding is that Rousseau is the anti-Hobbes and anti-Locke. No, that's bullshit. This is the nonsense. This is the kind of what I call the poor man's kind of basic idiot's view of political thought. Yes, Locke or Rousseau looks at Locke and thinks things are wrong. But he also accepts much of Hobbes and Locke's basic assumptions about the basis for both that man is fundamentally by nature asocial. Now, there's a different reason for this. They, Hobbes and Locke, there is like this. Hobbes slightly disagrees with. Locke slightly disagrees with Hobbes on this question, and Rousseau disagrees with both, right, on the natural social society argument. Hobbes says absolutely none. Mr. Locke says, well, yes, no political context, but there's human family. But even his human family rests on a contract model that I've talked about before in that sense. So therefore, you then have Rousseau saying, listen, yes, that man in the state of nature is a kind of an individual and not political, but this is and that in his social in his discourse in equality, he says that yes, but this is a kind of an animal. He's an animal without speech. He's not human yet. He's not with speech. He's not social. He's afraid of everything. He's terrified of everything. And what happens is, at a moment, instead of fighting, instead of conflicting, both Hobbes and Locke argue is the condition of what ultimately happens in the state of nature. Man runs away from everything in Rousseau. And what happens is that only when, because they're far away, and groups of human beings assert that this is property, this is mine, and other people by silence or not by silence or non-challenge and consent establish what he's called society in that sense. This is the famous argument of the discourse of inequality. Rousseau here becomes the kind of in the social contract is a kind of attempt to free frame and understand what legitimizes political right, what justifies political right, and it seems to fix or correct what he sees as errors in Hobbes and Locke. Not that he repudiates Hobbes and Locke. He just doesn't like them. He has issues with with aspects of Locke that emphasize, and students of Locke who all overstress the importance of commerce. Rousseau sees, in this way, shares the ancient prejudice against commerce, right? The classical world, the citizen was that one of the concerns of the city, that commerce was the realm of women and slaves, and that this is kind of something that Rousseau kind of wishes to return, a kind of that real people are citizens of this, and that commerce, although its activities, is not the principal activity of human beings in a sense. Rousseau is the idea of the modern Rousseau, and will become the basic fundamental teacher of and recaster of Hobbesian political thought, particularly of Hobbes's Leviathan for European political thinking. He will influence the French Revolution. This is the same problem with Nietzsche. People say, Nietzsche was responsible for Hitler. Well, Rousseau gets the blame for Robespierre and the French Revolution. Yes, I mean, I think Nietzsche and Hitler is more complicated. I think both of these cases it's unjust. There is a kind of guilt by association that equals Socrates' guilt from the point of view blaming him for Alcibiades and Charmides, right? The people who claim to follow him had done these horrible things, and therefore he must have done these horrible things, which is not, that's a fallacy. Um, and I think gets us to our the crux of what we're doing here in that sense. The crux of what we're doing here is kind of to understand the social contract and go read. We're going to go through it, read it like this, and we read chunks of it sometimes. Now, I want to look at basically aspects of it right now for the short term, and I'm going to have to move this over here like this. So I apologize. So hopefully this won't get too loud. The social contract is basically with 4 books. 4 books: book 1, book 2, book 3. Yeah. Now, in the context of it is this is the context. It is book 1. He defines it as the inquiring how man passed from the state of nature to civil state, and what are the essential conditions of the compact are. And he will examine this, chapters 1 through 9. Right, and this is relatively short book. This will be a short book. The books are not going to equate to this. Now, book 2 says I'm going to be discussing legislation. What is legislation? And talk about this. And here, 12 chapters, he highlights, he'll go through the question of what is legislation, which is what is the process. And it's interesting that in chapter 7 is where the legislators start. And this is kind of taking up the ancient classical position of the nomothetike, which is the lawmaker. This is something I've written a piece on this, and many years ago, about 30 years ago, and I've kind of wanted to get it published, but no one wants it because I need to expand some aspects of it and add new scholarship. I've not really followed. I mean, I followed it, but I have not really close. And there's been lots of discussion of the legislature and Rousseau. But again, book 2 with the 12 chapters deal with the question of sovereignty. What is the sovereign in that sense? And then the question of law and legislator, right? And then the people. Therefore, legislature does 2 things: the legislature as lawmaker, but also legislature as creator of the city and framer of the city. And that's so. This is that dual nature of lawmaker. As noticed, it's the lawmakers between the law and the people in the presentation, and that's very important in this sense. Book 3, I think it's the longest. It's 18 chapters, right? And this is discussing political laws. That is the form of government. He's not going to talk about the forms of government, right? He spells out the different types of government, the principal constitutions, in other words, the principles that form the governments of people, the classifications of governments, right? His 3 examinations, and his criticism of mixed governments, right? And then the question of what is suitable to what's good government, what's the abuse of it. This is it's the death of the political body. How does the political body die? And the question of sovereignty is maintained, and he continues this question. This is a big. He has this 3 chapters on the question of sovereignty is maintained, and then the question of deputies, the representative question, the questions of deputies, representatives, and then the institution of the government is not a contract. In other words, the creation of the government. Now, this is very interesting in that sense. It denies, at one level, it seems to deny the premise. Actually, this is where he addresses the criticisms of the social contract argument. And then the institutions of government, and then the ways to prevent usurpation, preservation, right? This is kind of like the practical books in that sense of Rousseau in that sense. And then last but not least, book 4, which continues the discussion of political laws and ways to strengthen the Constitution. Now, in many ways, this is kind of though he begins with the general will is indestructible, what becomes the example here is kind of a review of the Roman Republican Constitution. In many ways, this is kind of Rousseau's kind of grafting of not Sparta, but Rome onto his modern is the Hobbes, the modern social contract theory. So he talks about one, the general will again, right? The question of the general will, sovereignty. This is the origin of sovereignty in that sense, right? His concept of the general will, which is his reframing and explaining of the question of sovereignty. Then issue of voting, then elections. Then he's going to be the discussion of the Roman Comitia, the way the Comitia was the means by which the Roman people voted in that sense, the city, that the tribunate, right, the tribunate, the dictatorship, on dictatorship, which is very interesting. Now, you see this, you can see this chapter with the discussion of dictatorship is looking at the Roman dictator. You see this, it gives all of a sudden will give us the memory of Schmidt. Will give us a memory of Schmidt, and then on the civil religion, on the censor and the censorship, civil religion, and then the conclusion, and that's how he ends the book up, right? Again, I'll just point a picture to the title, right? This is on the social contract of the political right, right? Again, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, dedicated to Geneva, right? To declares himself a citizen. And this is that famous Aeneid quote. I have to go here. So I'm sorry, I'm going to go all the way down. Pardon, I just need to look at this for a second. I want to get the Aeneid quote right. Okay, this is the quote. This is right to know. I had to go to do it. In equal federation, we will make the laws. We're doing it. Masters basically says Rousseau chose this epigraph with care because he considered such luminary quotations as symbolize an entire work. As he says this in all these things. Again, the example of why this quote, in this case, he seems to have chosen a classic example of a social contract, as if, according to Virgil's poem, Rome is founded by free consent. In context, however, the line comes from a speech by King of Latium, whose army has just been defeated by the Trojans under Aeneas. A new Trojan attack interrupts the assembly, and the victorious Aeneas found Rome on the right of the strongest. Right, this is the reality of the poem in that sense. He says compares this. In fact, political right rests on violence and deceit, whereas the social contract is a matter of right. Right, as Rousseau puts in Geneva manuscript, right. I seek right in reason, not and do not argue over facts. Now we have to remember this all, and I want to point to this note. This is all tied to his greater work, which is called. He was going to say, listen. He goes. This is from his thing. He says. This is about his time at this time situation. He goes. Rousseau's inspection of the origins of this project is worth citing at length. Of the different works I had in progress in 1756 when Rousseau left Paris to live in a country house of Madame Dieppe, the one which I had been thinking about for the longest, which occupied me with the greatest pleasure, on which I wanted to work all my life, and which I thought would put the seal of my reputation, was my institutions of political institutions. I was convinced the first idea for it 13 or 14 years earlier, when being in Venice as secretary to Comte de Montaigu, French ambassador in 1743, said before I had some occasion to know the defects of that so highly praised government. Since then, my perspective had been greatly extended by the historical study of morality. I had seen that everything is basically tied to politics, and that, however one tried, no people would ever be anything except what the nature of its government would make it be. Thus, the noble question of the best possible government seemed to me to boil down to this: what is the nature of the government suited to the form of a people that is the most virtuous, most enlightened, wisest, and finally the best, to take this word in its noblest sense? I thought I saw that this question was closely tied to the following one. If indeed, if it was different from it, that is, what was the government which by its nature always stayed the closest to the laws? From that, what is the law? And a series of questions of this importance. I saw that all this led me to a great truth useful to happiness of the human race, above all to that of my country. This is Confessions, Book 8. Rousseau goes on to say, though I had already been working on the project for 5 or 6 years, it hardly got ahead. This corresponds well with Rousseau's letter to Motul of January 1762. I should tell you I have printed in Holland a small work that is entitled Du Contrat Social Principes du Droit Politique, which is an extracted from the larger work entitled Political Institutions, started 10 years ago and abandoned as I cease writing, and in any event, an enterprise that was certainly beyond my strength. Rousseau thus started serious work on his political institutions around 1751, but made only major headway with it after 1756. Despite Rousseau's foreword, some fragments, presumably from his original project, have survived. Notably, Estat de Guerre, that a state of war, is born of the social state, which is in Vaughan and the Plede 3 volume. A comparison between Rome and Sparta, again, that of luxury, commerce, and the arts, of laws, and other material of what appears to have been a list in the preface. See Vaughan's, this is the edition. Vaughan is the edition that I have, 2-volume edition of the political writings. Right? Some passages of these fragments are translated into English in editorial notes, right? He says right there. And the accounts of the confession cited earlier in this note. The historic study of morality may well refer to the part in the fragments of the history of morals, which again is part found in the Vaughan volume, in essence, the Plede, the classical edition of all the Rousseau's work in English and Polish, not Polish, in French that exists, the classical Plede edition. So let me stop for a second. And hence, this is, again, back to the title page of this, where he gives the quote from Aeneid, book 11, and then the picture, this classic picture, which I give in the cover of that, just two of them, this one and the other one, which is the picture of the woman. I think this is maybe Liberty. I don't know what she is. There's a cat, which is interesting. A cat. She's holding, I think, in many ways, she's standing elevated on a chair. She's holding a hat, a cap, which is, I think, the political symbol in that sense. It's a very interesting picture in that sense. That symbolizes this. And Rousseau picks these things. He picks the quotes, and this is a book he dedicates to Geneva, so he pays attention to it. And he picks his quotes carefully because this does this, right? Just says something, and then he has the image here that signifies, and he thinks that kind of addresses the theme he wishes to address in the social contract. Well, this is the introduction. I hope people found this useful. I will stop here. If you have comments or questions, if you have comments or questions, please put them below. And when I see them, I will look at it. If you liked it, like the video, like it, share it, get others. If you have not subscribed already, subscribe. Help us grow the channel. Encourage others that you know that would be interested in subscribe. If you didn't like it, I didn't like it. Please, you can say just thumb down, but say why in the comments and explain. Maybe I will learn something. This is something that if I did something wrong, or something that you could want to instruct me on or correct me on, please do that. Then another thing is, uh, 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 if you want to follow me on social media, my links are below. My academic social media links to find more about my who I am, what I do, and my research. Um, and these items. And then, last but not least, no, I mean, if you want to help me to do this, what I'm doing here, and these channels help contribute, and that's way financially to this, in a sense that assist. You think, oh, I like that. I like what you did here. Okay, well, you can do that by becoming a member of Patreon or Subscribestar, or you can look at. I mean, I have to come up with another method. I think maybe I'm not. I don't get super chats or things like this. I'm not big enough on YouTube. Yeah, I'm not monetized, so you have to get like a 4,000, a couple of thousand people, and which I only have. Like, we're in the beginning low 300s, right? So that's why growing the channel is important. The other thing is. Um, so therefore, if you want to help Subscribestar, Patreon is a way to do that. Another way you can help me is through buying one of my books listed below. They're available. You can buy them at Amazon or any online Barnes and Noble or any online bookseller. They should be available in that sense. If you, ironically, if you want to, it's not about Rousseau, so we put this. If you're going to buy my Lulu book, I ask you please buy it by Lulu directly, because if you buy it through Amazon, of course, Amazon makes money. I'll get something, but Amazon still takes a profit, a share of the price. And if you buy it by Lulu, I get the share that Amazon booksellers get. So I will get. That's the way you can help me a little more. That's it. Again, these are going to be posted, I think, Mondays and Wednesdays. And I think I'm going to be doing another Schmidt in that sense. I'm going to decide. I think I'm in the process of deciding what it's going to be. Probably going to be parliamentarism. Okay, well, take care and have a good day. Bye bye. Have a good day. Take care. Next time we meet, okay, I'm going to say this right away. Next time we meet, chapter one, book one, book one's, we'll be right into the text. Okay, so bye bye. Take care.